Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are exploring an absolute cornerstone of computer science and philosophy. We're diving straight into Alan Turing's landmark 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. Honestly, this document is nothing short of legendary. It essentially laid the intellectual groundwork for everything we now call artificial intelligence. Turing was attempting to look decades and decades into the future, and we are going to break down exactly how he built his arguments.
Turing hooks us immediately with this simple three-word question, can machines think? But he instantly spots a trap here. If we try to answer this just by looking up the everyday definitions of the words machine and think, we'd basically end up having to do a Gallup poll to figure out what the majority of people believe. And Turing argues that this is just absurd. It's entirely subjective. Instead, he decides to completely scrap this vague, messy question for something different, something rigorous, testable, and completely concrete.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. First up, the famous imitation game. Second, the universal digital computers that play it. Third, we'll face the critics and break down objections to machine thinking. Fourth, we'll tackle the consciousness debate. And finally, Turing's visionary ideas on learning machines.
Section 1. The imitation game, a new form of the problem. So Turing's brilliant method completely bypasses those endless circular philosophical debates about what thinking actually is, and he does it by basing his idea on a common party game. In the original setup of this game, an interrogator tries to guess who is the man and who is the woman, but Turing introduces a new problem by swapping out the participants. Now, the interrogator must guess who is the human and who is the machine. The reason this is so incredibly clever is that it draws a sharp, definitive line between a human's physical body and their intellectual capacities. As Turing notes, there is literally no point in trying to make a thinking machine seem more human by dressing it up in artificial flesh. We only care about the intellect.
Now, the crucial point is how the game is actually played to ensure total fairness. The interrogator stays in a completely separate room to prevent physical clues, like the tone of a voice or a slight hesitation, from ruining the test. All questions and answers are transmitted via a teleprinter. Think of it as an early, primitive form of text messaging. The interrogator asks questions and then has to identify the human and the machine. And remember, the machine's objective here isn't just to be smart. Its specific goal in the game is to actively cause the interrogator to make the wrong identification. It has to successfully imitate a human.
Section 2. Universal digital computers, the players of the game.
If a machine is actually going to play this game, we need to establish exactly what type of machine Turing means. He isn't talking about just any random mechanical contraption. He specifically restricts the players to what he calls a discrete-state machine. So what is that? Well, it's a machine that moves by sudden jumps or clicks from one quite definite state to another. Turing completely acknowledges that in the real physical universe, everything actually moves continuously. But he argues that we can profitably think of digital computers as discrete state machines because it completely eliminates intermediate confusion. A switch is either on or it is off. There's no murky in-between state to worry about, and that allows the machine to function with incredible reliability. Now, what's really interesting about this next concept is the staggering number Turing focuses on. 10 to the power of 9. Remember, Turing is writing this in 1950. Back then, computers filled entire rooms and had basically zero memory. Yet he makes this wild, prophetic prediction. He estimates that in about 50 years' time, so roughly the year 2000, it would be possible to program computers with a storage capacity of about 10 to the 9th binary digits. He believed that with this capacity, a machine could play the imitation game so well that an average interrogator would have no more than a 70% chance of making the right identification after 5 minutes. His foresight regarding computer storage and capabilities was truly mind-blowing.
Section 3. Objections to machine thinking, facing the critics.
Proposing that a machine could actually rival human intellect obviously invited massive criticism. So Turing systematically dismantles the strongest historical and logical arguments against artificial intelligence. One of the most famous historical objections came from Lady Lovelace, who worked with Charles Babbage's analytical engine way back in the 1800s. And honestly, her argument is still used today. She stated that the machine has no pretensions to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. The core of her argument is that machines can never do anything genuinely new. They just blindly follow our explicit instructions.
Turing, however, comes right back with a fiercely logical rebuttal. He bluntly points out that machines frequently take him by surprise. Why does this happen? Well, it's not because the machine is being magical, it's because we humans do hurried, slipshod calculations. We literally do not have the mental capacity to foresee all the complex consequences of a starting fact. When a machine effortlessly calculates those consequences, the result feels entirely surprising to us. Furthermore, he wonders if what we so proudly call original human work is really just the seeds of teaching taking root and combining in our own minds, much like a complex computer program.
Section 4. The consciousness debate. The solipsist water.
This pushes us into much deeper philosophical waters, dealing with the extreme requirements of emotion, feeling, and self-awareness. Turing quotes Professor G. Jefferson, who argued that a machine merely artificially signaling the right answers just isn't enough. Jefferson claimed that a machine must write a sonnet because of emotions it actually felt. It has to feel pleasure at its success or grief when its valves fuse. But Turing catches this argument in a brilliant logical trap. He points out that taking this view to its absolute extreme leads directly to a solipsist wall. Think about it. The only way you could truly know for a fact that a machine thinks and feels is if you actually were that machine. Since that's physically impossible, demanding proof of internal feelings is an impossible standard. I mean, we don't even hold other humans to that standard.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how Turing sidesteps the trap. He introduces the viva voce defense, which is essentially an oral examination. He imagines the interrogator challenging the machine on its sonnet. The interrogator asks, "Why use summer's day? Wouldn't spring day be better?" The machine replies, "It wouldn't scan." "Okay, what about a winter's day?" The machine counters, "Yes, but nobody wants to be compared to a winter's day." Through this incredibly natural back and forth, the machine proves a deep, sustained, contextual understanding of language and human concepts. It absolutely passes the behavioral test of intellect, rendering that invisible proof of feelings totally irrelevant to the imitation game.
Section 5. Designing learning machines, a biological metaphor.
So, how do we actually go about building a machine capable of passing this rigorous test? Turing completely shifts his perspective here. Instead of an adult mind approach, where you try to program a full mechanism exhaustively, completely accounting for every single possible scenario, he proposed the child machine. You start with very little built-in mechanism and minimal programming. The heavy lifting isn't done by the programmer up front. Instead, it's done through a course of education and experience over time. He uses this beautiful, really evocative metaphor to explain it. He says the child brain is like a blank notebook bought from the stationers. It has very little mechanism, just lots of blank sheets waiting for education, rewards, and punishments. A teacher could guide this machine using completely unemotional channels of communication, relying on built-in logical imperatives. You reward it when it gets closer to the desired outcome, and you punish it when it drifts away. Guys, what Turing is describing here, all the way back in 1950, is quite literally the fundamental conceptual blueprint for modern machine learning and neural networks. We've reached the end of our explainer, and I want to leave you with this final, truly provocative thought from the very end of Turing's paper. We can only see a short distance ahead, but we can see plenty there that needs to be done. Turing didn't have all the technical answers in 1950, for sure, but his vision perfectly laid the intellectual groundwork for everything we are doing with AI today. He proved that to really understand intelligence, we had to stop arguing over vague definitions and start testing for observable behavior. So the next time you marvel at a generative AI, ask yourself, is it just blindly following instructions, or has this digital child truly learned to play the imitation game? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating source material with me. Keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.